Good morning or good afternoon, scholars. Today we are reading a story called If a Bus Could Talk, the story of Rosa Parks by Faith Ringgold. What would you do if you got on a magical bus that could talk and drive all by itself? That is exactly what happens to this little girl. She learns about a very famous woman named Rosa Parks. While we are reading, I want you to think about the most important thing the author wants us to learn about Rosa Parks. There are three words that we need to review. The first word is segregation. Segregation is when black people and white people were kept separate and were not allowed to be near each other. Our next word is boycott. To boycott something means to avoid using or going to a place because you disagree with them. And last, we have civil rights movement. The civil rights movement is the fight for equal rights for all. Let's go ahead and start reading. If a Bus Could Talk, the story of Rosa Parks. This story is dedicated to Rosa Parks and all of the known and unknown men, women, and children of the civil rights movement who, through their singular acts of courage, made it possible for black people to vote, take a seat on a bus, in a movie theater, or at a lunch counter, and get a hotel room just like any other American citizen. This morning, a strange-looking bus pulled up at my stop. It didn't look anything like my usual bus, but it was on time and I didn't want to be late for school, so I decided to take it. The door opened and a voice called out, "Step on up, young lady." I got on thinking, I'll ask the driver which bus this is. But the driver was not in his seat. I paid my fare and looked around for him. There were lots of passengers, but their faces weren't familiar. I started to ask one of them if I was on the right bus, but before I could, the door closed and the bus pulled away from the curb, with no one in the driver's seat. The sudden start sent me reeling down the aisle, and I landed in a seat, holding on for dear life. None of the other passengers seemed to notice anything was wrong. "Stop this bus and let me off," I shouted. "I want a bus with a driver." "Please don't take that seat, Marcy," someone said. How do you know my name? Which one of you is speaking?" I asked, looking around. But the passengers were talking among themselves, reading, or just staring out the window. "This is a special bus, Marcy, and you are sitting in a special seat reserved for a very special person." "Amen, amen," chorused the passengers. "What bus is this?" I asked. "This used to be the Cleveland Avenue bus, but now it's the Rosa Parks bus. She is the patron saint of the civil rights movement. One day a year, we reserve that seat in her name. Take another seat and I will tell you all about her." Now the voice seemed to be coming from the bus itself. I could hardly believe it. I was on a talking bus. Trembling with fear, but curious as I could be, I took a seat across the aisle and settled down to hear this remarkable story. Who is the person that is telling the story? Marcy is on a talking bus. The bus is going to tell her about the life and contributions of Rosa Parks. Rosa Macaulay, the first child of James and Leona Macaulay, was born on February 4th, 1913, in Tuskegee, Alabama. When Rosa was 2 years old, her father, a skilled carpenter and house builder, left the family and went up north looking for work. Her mother took Rosa and Sylvester, her baby brother, to live on their grandfather's small farm in Pine Level, Alabama. They worked hard there, raising chickens, calves, vegetables, nuts, and fruit. Rosa helped her grandfather clear weeds and tend the crops. The family also picked cotton in neighboring fields. From Rosa's earliest childhood, she could remember scary nights when the Ku Klux Klan, a band of hateful white men dressed in white hooded robes, would ride past their farm, shooting off rifles to frighten the black people. Rosa knew that the Klan had burned churches and beaten, tortured, and lynched many black people. There were times when Rosa's family slept in their clothes so they could run if the Klan decided to burn their house down in the middle of the night. What was life like for Rosa's family? What was life like for them? Rosa Parks grew up on an Alabama farm, and there during that time, her family and other black people were tormented by the Ku Klux Klan. Despite these fearful conditions, Rosa's grandfather was an outspoken old man who made it known that he had a loaded shotgun and was not afraid to use it to defend his home and family. Grandfather Sylvester instilled a sense of pride in his children and grandchildren, and in Rosa most of all. Rosa was a nice little girl who loved praise, but she hated the disrespectful way whites often treated black people. One day, a white boy threatened to punch her, and Rosa picked up a rock and threatened to hit him back if he did. When her grandmother heard about this, she was very afraid because she knew something like that might cause Rosa to be lynched one day. When Rosa was 6 years old, she went to school. Her school had 50 to 60 children in one room and only one teacher. In Pine Level, Alabama, school for black children only went up to 6th grade, and it was open only 5 months out of the year, while school for white children went through the 12th grade and was open for 9 months. And the white children could take a bus to school, while the black children often had to walk a long way. However, Rosa's mother, Leona, had plans for Rosa's education. Leona was a teacher in a one-room school in the village of Spring Hill. To teach there, she had to travel a long distance and then be away from her children all week. But she saved up so Rosa could further her education. When Rosa was 11, she went to Miss White's School for Girls in Montgomery, Alabama. Several years later, Rosa went on to high school at Alabama State Teachers College for Negroes. She had to drop out of school when first her grandmother and then her mother became ill. Rosa's mother got well, but her grandmother later died. After Leona recovered, Rosa went back to school and got her high school diploma. But it would be a few years before Rosa could find a job using her typing and writing skills. So she took in sewing and did alterations at the Montgomery Fair department store. One day, on the way home from work, the bus driver told Rosa to get off and enter at the back of the bus after she had paid her fare. Then he drove off, leaving her in the street. This was common practice then. It is no wonder that black people would often walk a mile or more to and from work rather than ride the segregated buses. The buses were the worst form of segregation because black people could only sit in the back of the bus. If there were no white people in the middle section, black people could sit there, but only if no white people were left standing. Black people couldn't sit in the same row with whites, even if there was an empty seat in that row. It was during those times I got to know and love Rosa Parks, said the talking bus. She was a great lady with quiet dignity, despite all the cruelty she faced because of the color of her skin. So what do we know about Rosa so far? Let's go back and look at a couple pages that lets us know what the conditions were like for Rosa and her family. So we know that there was a group of white men that would travel around in these white hooded outfits on horses, and they would go around and burn down homes that belonged to black people. That doesn't seem fair. That sounds horrible. And Rosa and her family lived in fear every night that these bad men would come burn down their house. Now, another thing that lets us know what life was like for Rosa and her family, a boy at school threatened to hurt her because of the color of her skin. She wanted to stand up for herself, so she threatened him back, which we know two wrongs don't make a right. Her grandmother was very scared that Rosa might be killed one day for standing up for herself, even though she had darker skin than other people. Also, Rosa didn't get to go to school like the school we know it today. During this time, black children could only go to school up until 6th grade. There were also more than 60 students in each class. That's a lot of students to make sure they are paying attention and learning the most they can to grow their brain. The students who went to the white schools were able to go to school the way that you know it today. This last situation that we read about, where the bus left Rosa in the street, helps us really understand how terribly black people were treated during this time. Remember this word, segregation. Segregation means that black people and white people were kept separate and they were not allowed to be near each other. So there were so many rules on the bus that Rosa could not enter the bus from the beginning, from the front of the bus. If you had black skin, you had to enter the bus from the back. If the bus driver didn't like you, he would leave you. What on earth? That doesn't seem fair. Thinking of what we read this morning or this afternoon, how would you describe Rosa? What words could you use to describe her? Use evidence from the story to back up your claim. We'll finish reading tomorrow.